Welcome in to the NFL War Room Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Stopsky, and of course, I have my favorite guest, who's actually more of a co-host than a guest, because we've been doing it together for like 2 years. Coach Matt Giannettino. Coach, good to have you back.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy to be back in my once a week slot. Again, continue to follow up with great guests on the podcast, and you're doing a great job filling in the slots, obviously, when I'm not available. I love the interview with John, and I'm happy he did not fire you, even though he is your boss. So that was good, and always good to hear from John, and love what they do over at Giants.com and in their media stuff. They do a really good job. So really happy to hear that he was in the mix of this podcast, and looking forward to this episode.
Yeah, no, it was. I'm happy to not be fired. That's a good start. Not being fired is solid. No, it was good talking to John. He's one of my favorite people in sports, so it was fun getting a chance to shoot the shit and talk Giants for a bit. Then we had Charlie on the day after, and he was spitting some facts about some of these players. One of them, an offensive lineman that we're going to talk about in a hot minute. Free agency is now, it's not officially over, but we're now in that third wave where people are getting 1-year deals for like vet minimum contracts or 1-year prove it deals for like 10 mil. There's a bunch of signings yesterday, a couple today, as of recording. This recorded on Wednesday. So there was a bunch of them that came through, but we are essentially now like the top of the draft is set, right? Like we now know what these teams need in the first round, right? No one's taking a depth position in the first round. They're looking for guys who are going to be eventual starters or immediate starters and hopefully impact players for them. So the biggest positions, obviously the quarterback, the receivers, but then after that, it's also the offensive line. And the offensive line is going to, they have kind of like how corner was early in this draft.
Yeah.
There was not a consensus number one guy. But as time has gone on with corner, it's Quinyon Mitchell of Toledo.
Yeah.
And with the tackles, it looks like it's Joe Alt of Notre Dame. I had a time. I have officially done with Joe Alt. His grade is sealed. And he has one of the best grades I've given to a tackle, in a minute. Like he's a great prospect. But you're the O-line guru. We both played offensive line. You played a little bit longer than I did. So I'll give you the floor. I know how much you love Joe Alt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Joe Alt fan, obviously being a Notre Dame fan. I obviously watched him pretty closely. He's a really tremendous athlete, right? I think what I love the most about Joe Alt's game, and it's a credit really to the Notre Dame coaching staff, is that they're not just a wide zone team or just a gap scheme team. They're running a little bit of everything, right? They're running inside zone, outside zone, counter, GT counter, GH counter, GY counter, whatever you want to call it. And, they're running power, so there's a good sample size, I think, of Joe Alt. And it's not like a lot of these other guys where I think like most of them are, hey, this guy's going to be a great gap scheme guy, or this guy is going to really have to be in a wide zone scheme, where I think Joe Alt really has shown that he can do it all. So for me, I think he's the clear-cut number one offensive tackle. He's a mountain of a human being. I believe he's in at 6'7", about 315 at this point, maybe even a little heavier.
6'0", so almost 6'9", 321, like a massive human being.
Yeah, he's huge. I think there's some concern, and I watched it too, of his bend. But again, at 6'8.5", it's going to be hard to bend, like in that sense, right? And I think the length is what sticks out to you right away. His power, his pass protection ability, reminds me a lot of Notre Dame past offensive tackle Mike McGlinchey, right? Very similar type player. And I think that Joe is going to do really great things. I think he's a top 10 pick easily in the draft. I mean, I think there's no question about it. I think he's going to go in day one and be a starter for somebody. It'll be interesting to see how, I never like the comments about, well, he can just go in and play right tackle. It's like, it's not always the case. Like people make that out to be like, it's so much easier, right, than it is.
It's not.
That's not, it's really not. Right. So, I think he's super productive. I think he, has a little bit of, I would say one of his negatives is really just like his anchor a little bit. I think, again, it goes off to his length and his lower body. I think he's bigger in his upper body than he is his lower body, right? And I think that could be something that could impact him. But again, if you're looking at a Mike McGlinchey type guy in a top 10 pick, I mean, you take that any day of the week, right? And again, I think his versatility in terms of scheme is really going to help him out, where I think other guys are going to struggle in that avenue in this draft.
No, I agree. And I think a lot of the negatives that you saw, I saw as well. I texted Eric Eager about it, name drop, boom, name drop. Coming at 6 foot, almost 6'9", my main concern is like, is he too tall? Is not too tall to start, obviously, but is that going to be a detriment to his game? Because when I was at PFF with Eric, we were looking. It was around the time that Kyler Murray was coming out for quarterback, and they did a study, and it was like, being short's not great, but also being too tall at quarterback isn't great either. Guys who were like 6'5" and higher weren't doing great. And I got the kind of same deal with like Joe Alt. You want to be 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", but like 6'9". There's not many guys that have succeeded at 6'9". Not many people in total that are 6'9". But then you look at some of these guys who are close to him, and it's like that. Like the one that I thought that comped them by the closest in terms of like athletic ability was Colton Miller, right? Because Colton Miller was 6'8.5", 309 pounds, 34-inch arms, like kind of the same deal. Yep. Now I think Joe Alt is a rich man's version of Colton Miller, but Colton Miller took a little bit of time to adjust to the NFL game because he was just so big. Yeah. I do think with Joe Alt though, and I agree with you that he can play both gap and zone. He didn't grade as highly in gap, but I think it's because, and again, what Eric Eager was talking about on the Consumer Sports Show on Sirius NFL Radio that I produced, plug. They needed Joe Alt to win, and he did like a stupid rate, like 70%. And he wasn't just getting in the way; he was moving people. In his schemes. So it's I'm gonna name drop the whole fucking podcast. I was talking with Brad Spielberger in Indianapolis, and we were talking about Budda Baker, and he said that there was teams he was talking to that have like their own separate category for missed tackles, and then Budda Baker missed tackles, like tackles that no other person would even attempt to even get there, but Budda does, but he misses. Like, you're not going to give him a negative, right. No other to even be there. Right. And that's kind of like how I feel about Joe Alt. Sometimes he might lose a rep, but he's out there just mauling people. Yeah. I'll give me that over a guy who's a little more efficient, who's getting in the way. I think he's a true all-pro type player. I think he can play both left and right. I don't think that's a problem for him. I know he's mostly a left, but I think he can play right if he had to. The thing with Joe, we don't really know exactly where he's going to go yet. Right now, it looked like New York Giants at 6. Now it's looking like my fault. I don't think he's getting at the top 8. No, that's just not a thing. Right? I think he's staying there. I think he's going to be a top 8 pick. But this kid is pretty incredible. Well, I will say some scouts or people that are media scouts have talked about, he doesn't look that pretty when he's in pass pro. And I see it, but I also thought, I think it does all the time, because this reminds me a lot of the 2020 tackle class, 2021. Which one was Andrew Thomas? Is that 2021? 2021. So reminds me a lot of that, because I remember watching those tackles and Tristan Wirfs. Remember Tristan Wirfs, what his pre-draft grades were? He's got guard feet, you got to move inside. He's not pretty. His pass pro is kind of crap. And then you talked about Patrick Wilson, oh, look at those kick slot, look at those steps. Right. But at the same time, Tristan Wirfs would never get beat inside, and Patrick Wilson got beat inside like a fucking drum. And now Tristan Wirfs is probably the best tackle coming out of that class. The offensive line when it comes to pass protection is not about winning; it's just not losing. And Joe Alt does not lose. Does not lose.
That's exactly right. And I think that's the biggest thing that I was going to say about Joe Alt or any offensive lineman for that matter. Because I think, we'll get to JPJ at the center position from Oregon. And, like you look at the Senior Bowl. I mean, he was pretty damn good in the one-on-ones, and you watch in the first couple seconds, you're like, oh, D lineman won, and then the way he recovers and he beats somebody, like he won the rep. And like at the end of the day, and I could say this as an offensive line coach, and like it doesn't really matter how it's done as long as it's done right. Like I think for me, and it's not that ugly. Yeah, is it not picture perfect? I think you bring up a great example of Jedrick Wills. I was guilty of that. Like, wow, his feet are beautiful. Like he glides and he's a good pass protector, but he could not counter, back inside. And, again, that's where like a Tristan Wirfs, he did really well with that. Right. And I think that's an interesting thing. And I think that will kind of lead into my next guy, who's my second tackle on the board, where a lot of guys are worried about maybe his lateral quickness, or maybe his pass sets don't look as good, but he's a bigger guy, similar to like a Tristan Wirfs type of thing. He's not as that lean, long tackle, but I think if you can go out and get Joe Alt, I mean, I think he's the clear-cut offensive tackle one in this draft.
Who's your OT too? I'm very interested now.
So for me,
I only graded 5. So I'm just to see where your 5 land within the 5 that I graded. So who was your 5th?
Yeah, so I think this will definitely surprise some people. I think for me, it's J.C. Latham.
Interesting.
Out of Alabama. Yeah.
Okay. Give me the skinny on Latham. Why Latham as his number 2?
Yeah, I think Latham, again, I think there's a big knock on guys who you say, oh, well, he's only a right tackle. Well, guess what? That's just as important. Like, to me, I think it's so overplayed. I know I understand the blind side of a right-handed quarterback, your left tackle, but a lot of times they're going to put the best pass rusher on the opposite side of that now, right? And so you have to have a guy who, can really be strong at that point of attack. I think Latham does that. I think Latham has decent enough pass sets. Again, he struggles with like a wider 9 technique, which is, again, like when you look at Evan Neal, and I know the school comparison and the size comparison could be very similar, right? That's where we've seen Evan Neal struggle, is with those wider techniques. But I think he's just so heavy-handed, and he does such a great job with his inside punch. Honestly, 9.9 times out of 10, J.C. Latham's punch is inside the chest. And for me, I think that's so important. And that's what I think put him over the edge for me over like an Olu Fashanu, is because Olu Fashanu has some tendencies where he grabs outside the shoulder pads. And again, that can lead to, holding and just other issues. I always think back to like Eric Flowers, right? Like Eric Flowers was like the worst puncher in pass pro ever. He was always punching outside in the shoulder pad area. But for me, I think Latham is just one of those guys that he's just strong. Obviously he let up 2 sacks this year, which again, for as the way Alabama plays, I think, again, a little bit more power football, right? I think Latham has to be in more of that power type offense. Running downhill and kind of point of attack, but he's going to displace, a 3 technique down blocking, and he does a really nice job of that. And so for me, I think he was just a little bit more consistent, I think, than Olu Fashanu. And that's why I like him. He reminds me a lot of Tyler Smith, who the Cowboys drafted, who looks like he may move over to left tackle now that Tyron Smith is gone. But again, if he has to play right tackle, like there's no shame in that. And to sit there and say he's a top 15, top 20 pick at right tackle, like great. Like teams need that. You see so many times where teams have like 4 guys across the board from left tackle to right guard, and then they're solid. And then you have like a average right tackle. I think it's one of the most overlooked positions in football. And I think it's just as important. And so I think a guy like J.C. Latham is poised to be a really good right tackle. He played a lot. He played from his freshman year on. He rotated in as a freshman, but I think that, when you look at J.C. Latham at I think he's like 6'6", about 340, probably even a little bit bigger than that, maybe. But again, he ran a 5'3" at 340 pounds. I mean, that's pretty damn good. That to me is like, that's an athlete. I think that can't be overlooked. I think Latham is, for me, the number 2 overall tackle in this draft.
So I wanted to back up your point real quick about, having a right tackle as like your weak link is just not a great move. Like looking at the best pass rushers of this past season, right on the edge, you have guys like TJ Watt, right? And he rushed almost exclusively against right tackles.
Yeah.
You have Danielle Hunter, who, again, like 70% against right tackles. Khalil Mack was even. Montez Sweat almost exclusively against right tackles. Max Crosby against right tackles. Micah Parsons against right tackles. So like you need guys on the right side that can play. You know, and the thing about offensive line, right, is that you have to be solid across because you can't move your best tackle to fit the best edge rusher or defender, right? But the defense can do that. They're going to find your weakest link and they're going to put their guy there and wreak havoc. So if you're leaving a guy alone, especially at tackle, right, where like it's a rough spot to be one-on-one, you can get pretty fucked up. The things that I'm a little concerned with JC Latham, because I don't have JC as my number 2. I still think he's absolutely worth a top 20 pick. I do wish he would have tested. He didn't test today for Alabama. He has a good size, 6'5" and like almost 6'6", 342. He didn't look overly quick on film, and then you look at his height and his weight, and you kind of project what the numbers would have been, and they're not bad, they're not great either. Like if we're looking at like RAS score, like probably around a 7.5, 7.4, which again is not bad. We're not saying this is bad numbers, but I would have loved to have seen him test. But him not testing tells me that they probably wouldn't have been. That those numbers are probably right. Like if they were going to be great, and because there are some, I think there are some people out there who think JC Latham's film is better than Joe Alt's film, and I think Joe Alt's testing numbers like put him over Latham, and I think Latham seeing that's like, well, I now it's not me versus Alt, it's me versus Fashanu, and it seems like Latham is probably a little higher in most teams' minds over Fashanu. To
that point, Matt, I want to just say, I think why people may think Latham's film is better is the competition, right?
Of course.
SEC competition compared to independent football.
It's not in Power 5. Like what we're talking about. No name's a joke.
No offense to Joe Alt, but when you're going up against, Air Force and SC is the best competition you're going to play, right? When you're at Notre Dame. They had some bigger games this year, but again, coming from a Notre Dame fan, I can admit that their strength of schedule is not even close to the type of defenses and athletes that JC Latham is going up against, right? So I think that's where maybe that gets kind of miscued a little bit.
No, absolutely, and I think for JC Latham, just kind of wrap up here with JC, I do worry a little about his size. 340 pounds on the edge is, listen, if you have the athletic ability to do it, then like awesome. And they should absolutely give him a shot at right tackle. That's probably his natural position. I also wouldn't be opposed to kicking him inside of like guard.
Sure.
But he's got great length, like outstanding length.
Right.
What was his length? It was like 35 and 35 125. That is sick length. Which you kind of saw occasionally. He actually couldn't recover in time, but his arms are so long he's able to wash the guy inside to beat the redirect. But I thought overall though, like as a run blocker, he was very good, especially in zone. Like a guy that big was able to move to the second level very well. And then even like his true pass sets were like outstanding. Like, so there's a lot to love about JC Latham. I just like, I would feel more confident in the Latham pick if there was some testing. And to me, when I see there's no testing, there has to be two things, right? Either someone got to the player and was like, listen, you're going in the, like, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Marvin Harrison Jr., they're going high.
Right.
That's fine. But if they're not committed to going high and not set high and they're not testing, what it's telling me is their numbers are what we are, lower to normal. And that's where I hold off on JC, but I still have JC as a green grade, a plus starter with the potential of being better. So, and again, but nothing drops him for like, you need good guys across the line, guards, center, like, especially now, like, listen, there's a massive run on retirements for D tackles, but like we were just in the prime D tackle age of Chris Jones, Fletcher Cox, Aaron Donald. You're not walking out there with like, average guards and like winning games against these teams. So you really do need solid plus starters across the line of scrimmage. JC Latham, obviously, I think would be one of them. The thing about JC that I like is I think he can walk in and be like a starter day one and be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm with you. So who's your third tackle after JC Latham?
Yeah, so my third tackle would be Fashanu. And I think the thing there is, for his size, you'd like him to be a little bit more of an elite athlete, right? He's not as big in terms of weight. And that goes really quick back to Latham. I think, like, if Latham was to drop like 15, 20 pounds, which is kind of easy, especially in an NFL setting and what they're doing, he could definitely do that, right? And so Fashanu, I think you'd want him to be a little bit more of a quicker athlete, more of that elite type athlete, and he's not. Again, the punch, really, the inconsistent punching, being outside. I don't think he's as nasty as people would want him to be in the run game, right? And so that's a concern for me. You want nasty dudes up front. It's not always going to be a finesse thing. I mean, you look at, like, even like Jason Kelsey, right, who just retired, like, tremendously undersized, finesse, quote unquote, center, but he would dump guys based off leverage and finish, right? And so, like, that's the thing that, for me, I think with Fashanu is a concern in the run game. I think he's going to be a really good, I would say, just like above average to good offensive tackle, left tackle in the league, right? I think he's a top 15 pick. And he's going to be a good pro. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, again, everyone always goes back to the Ohio State film and how he didn't really, perform in that Ohio State game. And I know that I think you talked to Charlie Campbell about this and how he kind of dropped off, right? And he's one of the biggest kind of droppers over time. And I think, obviously that Ohio State game, maybe people look too much into it. I think you have to put it into account, right? Because, again, if we're watching a guy from, the Big Ten, his best game is against, again, Air Force or Bowling Green, and his worst game is against, Iowa or something like that, right? Like, that's concerning. So I think at the end of the day, I think Fashanu is going to be a good tackle. I do. I'd like to see him finish a little bit more and then just correct his punch. But I go back to Andrew Thomas on the Giants, where people had a lot of concerns about his punching ability, right? And his kind of hand placement, which was corrected with coaching, right? So I think it's something that can be corrected with good coaching. And I think, Fashanu, I think it is, again, I think you could argue he may be offensive tackle too for some people, but for me, I think just the inconsistencies was a little too much. And again, for his size, I'd want him to be a little bit better of an athlete.
Yeah, so I agree with you a little bit on the athlete part. I think he had like a 9.58 RAS, but he didn't do any of the agility testing, so I do think it would knock him down a little bit because I don't think he's the most agile of player. Yeah. I thought he moved well. No, don't get me wrong. I think he moved well, but I think there's a reason why he didn't do the testing. I agree with you. I don't think he's got that strong a punch. I think he's got pretty strong hands though. Like when he gets you, like he can hold you. I think he anchored better for a guy that lacks the strength that he has. If you know what I mean, because he doesn't really come out and doesn't bulldoze people, but also there were times where he was able to hold his own. Mm-hmm. But he does get out leveraged at times, and he can get bull rushed into a quarterback, like without a doubt. I think overall, no, I think what separates him for me is his intelligence and his instincts. He moves really well against stunts and blitzes. He picks them up very well. He sees the defense coming. But yeah, he's very much like not a strong type of player, which you can get away with, right? Like, absolutely. Like, he's not like weak. He's not a bitch. He's not Marcellus Wallace. He's not a bitch. But he's definitely not, like, when you compare him to like guys like Joe Alt and JC Latham, who are like these bulldozers, it definitely stands out. Like, oh, like this. But overall, like, he's a solid athlete. But I agree, for his lack of strength, you'd want to be like a rare athlete. Like, all right, like we're seeing. He's actually not my OT 2. He's my OT 3. I have Latham at 4, which I'm sure we'll get some shit on. But I like Fashanu. I think, again, he's also could play left or right. I don't think he's stuck in either one. So in my last mock, I had Fashanu dropping down to like 11, I think, to New England. So I think that'd be good because, like, right now they have no left tackle in New England. It's No, it's literally nobody. There's no one playing left tackle.
Yeah.
You're not, because there's Okafor and Owenu who both not played left tackle, and you're not putting a 6'2" guy left tackle in Owenu. This is not happening.
Yeah.
So this is a good one for them. Someone called him injury prone on TikTok to me. I was like, man, he got one injury.
Let's say one injury is not injury.
He got one injury, and then he tweaked his thigh at the combine, which actually probably the reason why he didn't run the agility drills. But like he'll be fine. Like people tweak their legs all the time at the combine. That's why most people don't run full combines. I am interested to see what he does at his pro day. I'm not even sure if they had a pro day yet. Penn State already had their pro day?
I don't think so.
If it has, the numbers haven't updated yet.
Yeah, I don't think
if his agility and balance and body control drills, like the 3 cone and the shuttle, if he comes back and he runs those really well, I think that will solidify him for me at OT2.
Sure.
But where it stands, where I'm projecting to be like good, above average to good, he's just below it for me. The problem with Fashanu is like outside of his pass protection, which is very good. Latham's true pass sets were actually better than Fashanu.
Yeah.
I think one-on-one, Latham is better. I think Fashanu does a better job of picking up blitzes and stunts. To me, Fashanu's kind of like just like a B+ guy across the board.
Yep.
Which honestly reminds me of a better DJ Humphries.
Sure.
But which is still good to make an impact player. Like this guy could definitely sneak into a few Pro Bowls and be solid for you. But when he was being rumored as a top 10 guy, I didn't see that. So I'm more in line with where it's going now, where he's like a 10 to 15 player. And I think that's probably where Charlie knows his shit. So if he thinks that teams like were never that high on Olu Fashanu, then they were never that high on Olu Fashanu.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, and just to kind of give like a disclaimer, I did have both Talise Fuaga and Troy Fontenot from Washington as moving into guard. So I ranked them as guards just as a disclaimer in this, because I think that's where their skill set is going to be best. And I'll explain that when we get there. But for those of you listening, and you're not going to hear both those guys' names in the offensive tackle ranks, it's because I project them as guards. And I think that that's where they're going to shine. And I'll get to that. But so they're not going to be in my top 5.
Interesting. All right. Well, then I will hold off on Fuaga because he actually would be my OT2. I agree.
I love Fuaga.
Like his length is definitely an issue, right? Like he does not, I think it's like 33 and something on his arms. Sure. He has the right size, right? He's 6'6", 324 or whatever. He's a big dude. Yeah. He doesn't have that length. And I could see because he has like that mauler instinct.
Yeah.
But I will say though, okay, we'll talk more about Fuaga in a minute. Dude works well in space. Worked really well in space,
really well,
so, and surprisingly well in space. Yeah. So we'll talk about him in a second, right? So who I'm assuming is Mims.
It's so I have a bit of a tie for 5. So
who's 4 and 5? So
it's Mims and Guyton, but I would say Mims a little bit higher than Guyton.
Okay, so let's about Mims, because Mims is an interesting prospect because he's all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what I see in Mims, and then I want you to rebuttal me, so it doesn't sound like I'm constantly I'm cheating off you in this test.
Sure.
So my comp for Mims was Mekhi Becton. Mm-hmm. Like this raw, crazy athlete, 6'8", 340 pounds, or the 5'07", 40. Sure. Crazy athlete, 9.56 on the RAS, that has like 800 total snaps over 3 years. And has like 100 true pass sets, like it's nothing. Yep. Based off of athletic profile alone, this dude's a first round pick. Yep. But when you even like some of the film you watch is like, fuck. Like there's some plays where you're like, this dude is ridiculous. He's a powerful puncher. He sustains his block. He finishes well. Like there is some. No, again, there's only 800 snaps, so you're not getting a ton, but like he's at the line in a phone booth, like this dude is great. Yeah. It's when you're doing zone blocking stuff. It's when you get into space. He's very not good. His balance is and flexibility, body control is like, yeah. And his production's shit. Like again, 800 snaps. The
Hasn't
production
played a
is
lot.
terrible. So for me, I had him at where did I have him at? I had him of the 5 guys I watched, he was last.
Yeah.
And like how I break it down, like, with like the primary traits and the secondary traits, like, they were both like the primary traits were like a C, and his secondary traits were a C plus. His analytics was a C plus. His film projection was a B. The thing about Mims, and again, this is why I bake it into it. He's going to get a lot of chances to fail, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just gonna happen. So I think if this was like a 3rd round pick, he probably just be like an average starter, rotational player. But because he's going to be a top 32 pick, he'll get the full 4 years to like work this out. And I think in 4 years he will be a solid player. But there's going to be some serious growing pains in the NFL. What do you see out of him?
Yeah, so I was going to say I'm not talking about as a player, but I think you could see almost him going down the road of like Isaiah Wilson, who also played at Georgia, right? Where Isaiah Wilson, he didn't have, Isaiah Wilson had off the field issues and maturity issues. I think that was his biggest issue. But ironically, both were Georgia guys, right? Mims, I think, is just a freaky dude, right? Like, I think, what was his 40 time? It was a 507. 507 for 340 pounds at 6'7" is insane.
6'8",
like,
almost 6'7",
yeah,
like fucking
so,
huge.
So there you go, right? I think obviously like lack of playing experience, right? And then like you could argue maybe a guy like that could have some injury issues, right? He had an ankle, which kept him out of, I think, the SEC championship game. He had a hamstring, which took him out of the combine. So like some of these things are adding up where it's like, okay, like what is there something else maybe going on here? Does he take care of his body, right? Another guy that I thought for like as super powerful as he is, I think he like turns it on and off. He kind of reminds me of like when I first started playing football and they'd be like, it's okay to hurt somebody because you're bigger. He has those moments where he can just throw somebody out the club. And then there's moments where he just like doesn't. And I'm just like, dude, he got to be more consistent. Right. So I think that's the thing with Mims that I would want to see. And to your point, I think he'll get that opportunity. I mean, I hope he capitalizes on it and doesn't turn into an Isaiah Wilson type thing. Because I think he could be, like, we could be talking about him being like the best tackle out of this class 5 years from now, because I think he has that boomer bust potential.
And that's what reminds me so much of Mekhi Becton, right? Like when we go back to that 2001 class, there were a lot of tough, like Mekhi could, like, he's raw, but like if he gets it together, like this is a kid that could be the best tackle in the class. He didn't, like, because he kept getting hurt. Like he was a crazy athlete, crazy size, and just could not stay on the field. Mims reminds me a lot of that, of that kind of profile. I hope it's better than Mekhi Becton, but like it does kind of seem like that might be the direction it's going.
Yep.
But he's the most boomer bust. Of all the guys we talked about, I feel pretty good that they're going to be starters. In 4 or 5 years. I don't know about Mims.
I agree.
Mims might be a starter by the time he gets to his second contract.
Yeah, and I think that kind of like segues nicely into even the guy who I had a little below him in Tyler Guyton, right? Tyler Guyton started his career off at TCU, transferred to Oklahoma. He started off his career as a tight end, right? So he's super athletic. Another guy, 6'7" now, 325-ish, right? I think is what he is. Ran a 5.19 in his 40-yard dash. Again, pretty good. But he's a guy that, he's a second round. He'll probably be like a second round guy. But again, like, I think could develop into I think he could be a good starting tackle in this league. I think he's going to be a little bit more of a project. He's not going to start day one. Obviously has to be more consistent, but again, super long. I think he's like one of the longer guys. Strength, speed is there, right? Like all the old school strength, speed, all that stuff is there for him. I just think, again, lack of experience playing the position. But again, you get him with a really good offensive line coach. Like I think if Dante Scarnecchia was still with the Patriots, like ding, 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 this would be your guy, right? And so he's I don't want to say he's a developmental guy, because I think that's like a guy who maybe you take a mid-round or late round flyer on. I think he could still produce. He's just going to need to, like, I think for the New York Jets, right? You draft a guy like that to sit behind Tyron Smith, learn from Tyron Smith. That would be a great spot for him. He needs to be behind a guy who's into the middle to later parts of his career who he can learn from, right? And I think that's where he will be the best. And I think with all these guys, right, except Joe Alt, I think they all have to go to a spot that fits them. And I know that sounds so cliche.
Well, that's very true, though. You're very right.
Right. I mean, it's again, like, if JC Latham is in an outside zone scheme, like, I don't know if he's going to do well. Like, he moves decent, but throughout his career, like, it's not going to probably go over really well.
He won't ever hit his tier, like his projection.
No, he won't be a top potential guy, right? So I think with Guyton, I think he's a guy I look at to say, okay, like, he has potential, he could be there. And I know there's some like even maturity concerns with him as well. But again, newer to the position, transition from tight end. And I mean, you've seen that a lot. Like a lot of those tackles, they used to be tight ends or a quarterback, like Lane Johnson was a quarterback, right? So that could help him, but at the same time, I think he's another guy that he's going to need a little bit more time to kind of to grow and age into who he has to be as a pro. I think that's important. And then for me, I'm just going to look at my notes, but I think it's two sleepers I have. Blake Fisher from Notre Dame. He's a guy.
Dude, I fucking love the Blake Fisher coming out. Yeah. Like, so yeah. I had Notre Dame for a bit when I was doing the Shrine game, and it was his freshman year, and I watched his high school tape, and I was like, this fucking kid is going to be a top 20 pick. And then he just has a fucking horrible college career, can't stay on the field. Like comes out a year too early. Like, it's like if you're, and you see this a lot of times with linemen, like who did not do well in college, and then they produce in high school. And you look back at they do well in the pros. You look back at their high school stuff, and you're like, oh yeah, they were fucking good.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
They were actually really fucking good at one point. And I think Blake Fisher, that makes sense.
Yeah, Fisher, and again, look at Notre Dame offensive linemen. They're usually coached very well. Again, scheme kind of interchangeable. And then the other guy I think is like a sleeper, a guy that I think we could be talking about a couple years from now once he develops. Tylen Grable from UCF. He's a guy that I think guys have all the way down, lower on their list. But I'll tell you what, as a late round flyer or a free agent signing, I would not be surprised if that kid. What he did at the East-West Shrine Bowl, I thought was really impressive. He's a UCF guy, coached by Herb Hand, one of the best offensive line coaches in college football. Again, gap scheme, zone scheme, combo. He's a good little player. I like him as a sleeper, and he's a guy that I think could really be again a huge sleeper in this draft.
So I want to Guyton real quick before we hop over to the guard. So I have not watched Guyton yet, but I have the number grades done, right? Like I still have to put in the analytics and I have to put in the film. Right now, his production. So the primary traits are very like production heavy, right? Yeah. And his production is not super high. Like it's it's almost like an F.
Sure.
And then his athletic stuff, like his length and his 3-cone and his shuttle, are good, like a C+ almost to a B. Mm-hmm. And then again, I don't have the analytics in, so I had not watched him yet. I'm definitely interested to see where he goes. I do wonder though, when I end up doing guards, is like, will he fit? I know he probably has the length, has the size, a play tackle.
Yeah.
I wonder though if the numbers will suggest moving him inside to play guard, which has been talked about.
It could be. And I think the other thing too is like you look at Oklahoma's offense and you look at like how translatable is it to the NFL, right? And that's the other piece of it where they're like, their scheme is kind of high schoolish, and that could be a concern. Again, more of like basketball on turf, hence why he was a tight end converted. But again, pedigree, like Oklahoma's got some pretty good O-linemen.
Dude, man, I had a chance to. So whenever I do these things, I always go back and I watch the best players from when they were in college. So I watched Lane Johnson, I watched Trent Williams in their Oklahoma years. I got to watch Pittsburgh Steelers legend Landry Jones throw some passes. I watched 3 total games of this, and Sam Bradford was on the ground like 4 fucking times with his shoulder like hanging out. Yeah. No idea how he went 1-1. I still don't understand how he ended up going to the Rams in whatever fucking draft that was. The draft the draft that broke football. But if for younger listeners, before the rookie wage scale, you could charge whatever you wanted as a rookie. And you got, I think Sam Bradford got like $60 million to play quarterback, which at that point was fucking like astronomical. And he sucked. Like he could not stay in the field. And after that happened, the league was like, all right, we're not fucking doing this anymore. we're not paying Sam Bradford the same we're paying Aaron Rodgers. We're just not doing it. Or at that point, Peyton Manning.
Well, one thing I have to say, I want to put a PSA out there for all the high school kids out there right now who think they're an offensive tackle and their parents think they're an offensive tackle and they're wondering why they're not getting D1 offers right now. It's because you're not 6'7" or 6'6", 330 pounds. If you look at the guys coming out, that's what they are at tackle, right? And even Fuaga and Fontenot, like, our concerns are because they're 6'4", 6'3", like, you know what I mean? Like even 6'5" now is becoming, to me, if I was going to build an offensive line, I'm going to get the bigger, longer guys at tackle and the shorter, quote unquote, shorter, bigger, powerful guys in the middle. Like that's just, to me, I think that's how you build. So PSA to all you high school kids out there wanting a D1 offer, that's why. Because when you're 6'3", 285 pounds, it's not really much going on.
Yeah, dude, I'm looking at these grades that we have for height. Like all the guys that we talked about, and even including Guyton, you know, we're talking about guys with A's and B's, B pluses on height grades. Like, and like JC Latham, Fuaga, Fashanu, 6'6" guys. That's B grades. That's B. Yeah. So you're 6'3". Think about where you are. Like you are low.
You're a D.
You're low, man.
Yeah.
So let's hop over to guards real quick. So let's start with Fuaga. I fucking love this guy. Like I love him. I love him like way too much.
Yeah.
I have him like same tier as Fashanu. If you had to put a number grade on it, I think it's like a 1 number difference. Like not a lot. I know the length is a problem. It's definitely a problem. And again, kind of like your point though, right? Like when I say his length is a problem, let's look up his arm length real quick. I think kind of point to what you just said about like you're not 6 foot fucking whatever. Like that's why you're not getting these offers.
I think he's got 33 and 3/8.
Yeah, it's not small. Like it's still very, very large. There we go. Now I couldn't type. Yeah, 33 and 33 125. That's still pretty fucking big, like in terms of like arm length, and that's a D minus. Like,
sure.
Again, like how many kids are walking out fucking 33, like almost a 1/4 inch arms. Yeah. The thing for Fuaga, for me, dude's an absolute fucking winner in the run game. Yeah. Like any scheme does not matter.
Gets the second level really well. Better than anybody.
Yeah, I agree. He's a fucking bulldozer. He gets off really well. Outstanding get off as a pass blocker. And as a run blocker. He's got good base, solid base, which is good because like he has kind of like average agility. Like overall, like athletic ability. Again, I think his RAS was pretty high, like a 9.61, but I don't think he did the agility testing. He did not. And I think that ended up being like it would probably look like a C on the agility testing. But this kid he's pretty fucking good, and he produced at a super high level.
Yep.
At Oregon State. Even like PFF grades, yes, but also looking at my man was an All-American. That was a unanimous first team All Pac-12. Now he's probably one of the best players ever in the Pac-2. Like this is a guy that, to me, like this is the kind of kid I would love to draft because nothing about his film scares me, right? Yeah. Nothing about his testing scares me. It's just like, is he the right size? To me, he's a right tackle. Like he's very much a right tackle. We've seen guys with that length be okay at right tackle. And I think he's like a C+ pass protector. Like he's still very good.
Yeah.
I think this kid's gonna be great, and I agree. Like but he might be a guard for some teams, and he'd be a fucking All-Pro guard. Yeah. Like incredible level of All-Pro guard.
Yep. 100%. Listen, I think he definitely would be an All-Pro guard. I think he's a little bit bigger than like a Zach Martin type of guy, right? Mm-hmm. So that tackle spot makes a little bit of sense, and he has again position versatility, right? So, but I think with Fuaga, what I love about him is he gets to second level and he is hurting linebackers. Now, the one caveat to that is I think sometimes he doesn't lock on and he just like tries to like punch and pop type guys. Like he's used to just launching guys. And sometimes he can get over himself a little bit. I think that's a little bit of a concern. But dude, you put this kid in an outside zone scheme, and he is climbing to the second level. He's knocking over defensive linemen to his help partner in double teams. And I mean, I think he's going to be a really freaking good guard. But I think he would be a good starter at tackle, but I think he'd be a really freaking good guard. Like really good.
I agree. I had a mock to Vegas because just imagine him as a fucking Raider. Like he screams Raider.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Like he's gonna fuck you up, man.
Yeah.
Like, I love it. All right, so who's your second? We'll do like top 3 on guards. We're already running like in the 45 here.
Yeah. I think for me, I think it's Fontenot. I think he's a guy who gets out in space really well.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen him like fake the down block, go kick out a nickel back in a screen. I think of like the Miami Dolphins, like what they're doing on the perimeter with their screen game. Like he's going to be he could be a really freaking good guard. And again, in a zone scheme, could he be like a Deion Dawkins type of guy at tackle? Yeah, he could be, right? I thought his national championship game, he struggled a little bit. I think that was in a big spot. Again, he did a really nice job with Penix. I think he does a really good job of picking up stunts, which is hard for a college kid to do. And I think that's the biggest transition to the NFL. Again, recognizing blitzers, picking up stunts, understanding that. I think he does that better than anybody in this draft, to be honest with you. I think IQ-wise, super smart. Was a part of the best offensive line in the country, right? But I think he really could be a freaky good guard. I think that's really important. I mean, the way he runs out in space, he's a special athlete. But again, I really got concerned watching that Michigan tape. I know it's a very tiny sample size for the amount he played. But again, I think that definitely concerned me, especially towards the end of the game. He was getting like turnstiled a little bit. But I think he's a really good tackle. He played at a high level, played on a winning team, did a great job of protecting Penix. And I think he's a really good guard. Again, I like Fontenot. Well, sorry, I like Fuaga's like a little bit more nasty, right? I think he's just a little bit more like a dirtbag, you know what I mean? Which I think is what you need in the offensive line world. So for me, I have Fontenot a little bit lower. They're tied, but I would say Fuaga a little bit more. I'd push for him there. So yeah.
So I have not finished Fontenot yet. So I've done almost all the grade on him minus the film grade. Yeah. Which right now it's gonna come out like right at that border of like at tackle. That border of like average starter to plus starter, right? Like that, right on that border. To me, athletically, he reminds me a lot of Jedrick Wills. Yeah. Right. Like, he's 6'3", 317, 501. Wills was 6'4", 312, 505. Like they're pretty close. Now I think Wills is a little more aggressive. My biggest concern, just looking at the grades, not breaking the film yet, is I agree. So his pass protection numbers very good, and actually much better than his true pass set numbers. So he was better against zone against blitzes and stunts than he was one-on-one.
Yeah.
But his run block success rate is like super low.
Yeah.
And that's where I am concerned. Like, can you move a player to guard who's like not just like suboptimal, but like questionable at run blocking, right? Like that's where I would be a little hesitant. But again, I haven't watched enough yet. You've watched. Like, do you feel that like it'd be okay moving him to a guard spot?
Yeah, I think so. I think he would be. I really feel comfortable with that. I think he would be fine. I think, again, his lateral movement is special. I think that's what you need out of a guard. As a puller, he's super athletic, right? So I think about him on like GT, right? Sometimes he looks like a running back getting through some of those holes as a puller. And so I look at that as a guard in the NFL and running power or, pin and pull stuff and G sweep, right? Like Philadelphia Eagles, I know they're not going to get him, but wow. I mean, that would be a heck of a fit there.
I don't think so. I actually had him mocked to Miami, one pick ahead of Philadelphia.
Okay, so there you go.
I think there's a real chance of him getting there. Before we go into your third guard, it's kind of like where I'm looking at right now for offensive line. I think with this Minnesota trade, which is definitely happening into the top 5, definitely, but I think in the top 3.
Yeah.
It's gonna go quarterback 1, 2, 3. I have a really hard time thinking it's gonna be quarterback 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't even remember if it ever happened before, and I don't think it's gonna happen now. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. stays with the Cardinals, right?
Yeah.
And then it's gonna go like Malik Neighbors, Drake May, and because of that, Rome Odunze is gonna be moved into the top 10 because no one's gonna because after Rome Odunze, there's a massive gap between him and Brian Thomas, who a lot of people like, but I think in terms of NFL teams, I think there's a different tier there.
Yeah.
And then you have Dallas Turner, I think is definitely going to Atlanta at the moment. And then we have Joe Alt, right?
Right.
And then I think you get to that weird, all right, well, that now we can start talking about offensive line. We also have Brock Bowers there, and Brock Bowers is like the number 4 guy on most people's boards.
Yeah.
And if you're the New York Jets, you're like, well, fuck it, let's just go with Brock Bowers. Right? We got our line now. Let's go with Brock Bowers. Let's throw him out there with Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson and let Aaron Rodgers just fucking cook and have a good time. And so I had Ola Fashanu go to 11 to New England. The Denver fucked themselves. They have to take a quarterback. They have no choice. They're walking out with Jarrett Stidham right now, quarterback.
Yeah.
So that's going to have to be Bo Nix, which is going to be a reach for Bo Nix.
Yeah.
And then I think you get into this run of offensive linemen, right? But at the same time, because you had all this run on quarterbacks and receivers, you have all these edge guys like Verse and Latu, who has also haven't got off the board yet. Yeah. The corners haven't got off the board yet. Byron Murphy, the D tackle hasn't got off the board yet. So I think there's a chance that some of these tackles can move down further than they were originally projected. So I had JC Latham going 18 to Cincinnati. And also the loss of the guards and centers in free agency, I think, is moving Jackson Powers Johnson up the board, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think there's a real chance that Latham, Fontenot, Mims, Guyton, these guys could end up in the 20s, which is way lower than they should be going.
Sure. No, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
So I'm sorry. So let's get to your third guard. Who's your third?
So for me, I think it's really close between Graham Barton from Duke, who I think can play center, guard, tackle. Layden Robinson from Texas A&M, who I think is one of the nastier dudes in the draft. And then a guy I really like is Cooper Beebe, who's a bigger guy at 325 pounds.
Okay.
I think athletically, he'll struggle a little bit. I'll go with Barton just because he's a left tackle, a little bit more athletic. I think, again, in terms of the ultimate swing guy,
and he's being tripped as a first-round guy right now. I had him mocked to Detroit at 29.
Yeah,
in the last mock,
which makes sense, right? Because I think you could bump him inside the guard, replace Jonah Jackson. Makes a lot of sense. I think he's 6'5", 313, right? So could add maybe another 10, 15 pounds to his frame. Again, like a longer athletic guy. I think for me, he was sturdy, in both run and pass. I think, he was another guy who was injured. But I think for me, when you look at what can you do for me today? He could do pretty much all three. He played left tackle. He hasn't really played guard or center. So again, there's still questions there, but I think he projects best at guard or center for a team that needs it. And again, I think he's just a little bit more athletic, and I think with the right coaching, he could be pretty good.
Love it. And so let's go with your center. Well, let's talk about Jackson Powers Johnson first, because that's going to be whether he's your first center or not. He is going to be the first center off the board.
Yeah, and he is my first center. Spoiler alert.
So I have not had a chance to watch him yet. I've been doing mostly tackles, but this guy went from the 50th player to now the 15th player.
Yeah.
Tell me about this kid. What's his deal?
No, man. Listen, I watched the Senior Bowl, and I think it helped him so much. He did a great job. I love Oregon's offense, first of all, right? Wide zone team, runs a little bit of power, but in terms of a zone type offense, right, going to be really, really good. 335 pounds, 6'3", right? That to me is ideal center. Like I said, when he was at the Senior Bowl, one-on-one, I think he looked like he struggles, but his replace footwork and finishing ability is special. I think he really is one of those guys that, you look at him and you say oh, that doesn't look great. And then boom, he finishes. And it's wow, that was impressive. If he could clean up the point of attack stuff, Again, at center, it's really tough. You're on an island a lot of times, especially in an odd front, right? You're on an island with a nose. But he did a really nice job, in Oregon. And again, I think that what's the word I'm looking for here? That recoverability, right? I think that's the aspect that, he could be really tremendous. And I think pass blocking is his biggest strength.
Love that. And also, quickly up against the clock here. Two other centers because centers usually don't get a whole lot of love, right? Like they'll get like one guy that goes in the top like 75 and the rest go like in day 3. Which I think is bullshit because like centers are fucking important. And you look at all the teams that have won Super Bowls in the last like 10 years and most of them have pretty good quality centers.
Yeah.
They're not walking out there with slapdicks. So give me but no, you can still find centers like quality centers like in after top 100. So, but tell me about two other guys that you feel pretty strongly about at center.
So I like Zach Frazier a lot. He was a guy who started his career off at West Virginia at guard, right? But he moved to center. When he was a freshman, he didn't really allow a sack at West Virginia. Again, smaller guy, 6'2", right? So that's very small. I don't know where that lands on analytics wise, right? But that's smaller.
For a center, probably be not the worst, but it would
be not the worst, right? But again, 314 pounds, ran a 5'2", decent time. But he's tough, tough, hard-nosed kid. I think a guy like I think Detroit, like he fits that hard-nosed, blue-collar type thing. I think that's really big for him. I think he allowed 1 sack all season as a center as well. And then I think Cedric Van Pran Granger from Georgia, right? 6'4", about 300 pounds. Guy played a lot of football. He has the ability to really win at the point of attack. Did a lot of good things in the SEC against top-level competition, bigger guys. I think he's a really decent pass protector, but I think where he's going to be really good is at the point of attack in the run game. But he's a guy that I would say would be 3. He's like, besides, well, I don't even want to say JPJ because I think JPJ, like I said, he spent some time at guard where the kid from Georgia, he spent his whole career at center. So you could argue he's the really only true center that I think is the highest rated guy. But JPJ definitely is the number 1 center. And then I would follow that up with Frazier from West Virginia and then Van Pran Granger from UGA. That's a mouthful to say, by the way. Van Pran Granger. Can you please change your last name? So it's like Scott Van Pelt, right?
Well, SVP, right? We call it down for him, but
so
that's a full fucking hour right there, my man. So I will for the fans, I will release a bonus episode on Friday. Because I'm this whole fucking week has been such a shit show. Like I feel like I've been like constantly like behind the 8 ball. Now I want to do some more free agency stuff because like I've only talked like a little bit about it. So I will release a bonus pod on Friday, a small bonus pod, not fucking 20 minutes probably. We'll do a little bit of stuff. I do want to talk about the Pats. I want to talk about the Vikings. I want to talk about the Cardinals a bit. So we'll do something with that. Also, I kind of also want to revisit the Commanders because like when I did the Commanders originally, I had forgotten about Zach Ertz. We put Zach Ertz in there, but it didn't look as cool without his fucking in there. So I will redo that for Friday. Also, Schmuck mentioned the week for Friday, of course. But this was fucking love. I love O-line play. I love it. This is great. So
you and me both.
So with that, you'll be back next week.
Yep.
We'll to figure out what the next topic is going to be because we'll brainstorm on that. But like, dude, it was a good fucking time to be a guard in the NFL, man. Robert Hunt's out there with $100 million playing guard. Imagine saying that like 10 years ago that a guard's getting paid $100 million. Like, fuck out of here. Good for him, though.
Yeah.
But dude, thank you so much for coming on. You're the fucking man.
You bet.
I love the Mickey Mouse hat as always.
Thank you.
I hope your vacation was fun.
It was great.
And I'm sorry you're back in the cold Northeast.
It's all right. It's okay. But we're back and we're ready to roll.
We're fucking back. Yes. All right, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.